Thank you for joining us this evening for the Artists Exchange, a group created by and for artists to share new work, ideas, resources, and opportunities monthly over a glass of wine or tea if you prefer. I'll take a sip. So grab your beverage and join us as we discover the work of Archana Horsting and Dewitt Chang. I'm Shelley Rugg, the gallery coordinator at Gallery Route 1. Now, please join me in welcoming our host, Pamela Blotner, an artist, educator, and curator who lives and works in the Bay Area. She has worked as a sculptor, illustrator for the Houston Zoo in Houston, Texas, and the Leatherback Trust Conservation Organization, and as an artist designer for Human Rights Watch, Physicians for Human Rights, and the UC Berkeley Human Rights Center. Blotner's sculpture and drawings have been exhibited in Europe, Asia, Africa, and the United States. She has taught at a number of universities throughout the US, and she is co-curator and founder with Me Preckler of Artists Beyond Boundaries. Please welcome Pamela.
Thank you, Shelley. That was a lovely intro. And I think I'm going to add a long intro to you next time. That's what's missing. Okay, but my great privilege tonight is to introduce Archana Horsting and Dewitt Chang. And they are two artists who began their careers as painters, but were drawn into and developed dynamic careers other places that until now have kept them away from the studio. So today we'll have the privilege of hearing about their journeys back into making art. Okay, so first we'll hear from Archana, and Archana is a painter and quite an accomplished artist, but better known in this area as the co-founder and former director of Mccullough Institute. And for those of you who are unfamiliar with Mccullough, it's a community nonprofit organization, an artist residency, and an art gallery that also offers classes. So about Archana, a little personal information, if you'd call this personal. She got her BA from UC Santa Cruz and studied art history and art practice in Italy, in Padua and also in Venice. And her quote that I'm going to steal from her is, "All of my artwork reflects a lifelong interest in landscape and architecture. Reconnecting with her artwork after her long hiatus was, in her words, a matter of finding the path forward." Thank you, Archana. You're up.
Thank you, Pamela. So I came to California when I was 10. My mother, Ruth Horsting, was an artist, a professional sculptor. She was hired in 1959 at UC Davis Art Department, and she was there to teach sculpture, and I was lucky enough to grow up there. I traveled a lot as a young woman, and I studied the history of Italian, European, and Indian art, trying to understand the roots of Western art and what was inspiring me. After graduating from UC Santa Cruz in 1971, I returned to Europe, and I was working on sculpture in Italy and then printmaking at Atelier 17 in Paris. Printmaking allowed me to explore two dimensions with the tools of a sculptor, and I was more comfortable in 3D originally. Ultimately, it led to my work as a painter. In April of 1974, I co-founded Mccullough Art Institute with the artist Yuzo Nakano, whom I met at Atelier 17. And in late 1979, we moved Mccullough's studio, workshop, gallery, the whole kit and caboodle, to the building we occupy today. And that's in Berkeley, California, at 1060 Hines Avenue. In late 1979, that same year, I moved my own studio to the Emeryville Artists Co-op. So during these big transitions, I was unable to focus on my art practice, but subsequently, I needed to find a new way forward. I couldn't go backwards to the work I'd been doing before those big breaks. The artwork I am going to show you next began after that path was forged. So the first image is called Seesaw, and it's an etching, just a black ink etching on a warm beige paper based on pen and ink drawings using the surrealist approach of automatic drawing. Only I made those drawings on paper first, very slowly, and I let the pen tell me which way it wanted to go. So it was kind of a slow automatic drawing, very slow. The next one is Padovan Arches, also an etching, and it's part of a series called, all of these are part of a series called Text, Context, Texture, and Architecture. So we're still on the etching for a moment. There are about 20 images in all, and I use about a quarter of them were black on a beige paper, and the rest were on handmade paper with a Japanese Gampi tissue shinkole. Okay, next please is Leaf Shell Fan, and I did this with oil stick, which is dries permanently. It's not it's not a pastel, an oil pastel, which is non-drying ink. So the oil stick is just like oil paint, only I could manipulate it very easily with my hands, similar to the control of tone on an etching plate with a hand wipe before printing. So if anybody who've done that, you have your plate and you have a hand and you go across it many different directions or circular till you get the tone controlled the way you want to print it. So that experience of years, decades of printmaking allowed me to control my paint or my paint stick with my hands. So everything I do goes back to kindergarten, and you probably all did it before yourselves. So the next one is the Antique Landscape from 1987, and it's also oil stick. And here at this point, the line became contours for a solid mass. So you have the strong black and white contrast, kind of figure ground, which often in my work reverses itself as you're looking at it. The feathering, which occurs along the edges, was because I really don't always like a hard-edged abstract image. And also it allows it kind of acts like a prism with the light, and on one side of a column, you might have a cool glow, and on the other, you might have a warm glow, or vice versa, depending on how your eyes work. So some people see it, and usually you can't see it in a reproduction, but in reality. So the feathering became very important because it allowed me to interact with the two figure ground spaces. And then the next one is called Precipice from 1987, and it's an oil stick, and it has a much more precarious balance than when you compare it to the Antique Landscape. So sometimes I'm about balance and everything rational and fitting together and integrating, and other times I'm very interested in precariousness. And then the next one is called Cactus Conversation, and it's a triptych, so 3 times the size of the 2 I just showed you. And those are 32 by 40 panels. So it's like 96 by 40. And it's also oil stick. and the individual images were being worked on in my studio at the same time. And suddenly they started talking to each other and asking to be one whole composition. So that's what happened a lot to my work, is that single images became diptychs and triptychs, even occasionally a quartet. Let's see, the next one is called Mexican Pyramid from the 1990s, I believe, and it's also a triptych, also an oil stick, and it's based on drawings from my sketchbook. And in this one, I added new vocabulary, including, you can see the feathering on the stairs, right? But you can also see some frottage that I did in the sort of vegetation area. And then on the far right, you can see fingerprints that I used. As I say, this goes back to kindergarten or very, very simple techniques. And then in the middle, there's a sort of broken line, and that line is created in a new way that I had never done before. And that was by pushing the paint stick closer and closer together until the line almost disappeared, but not quite. So I like doing that. I think the next one is called Tributaries, and it's from about 2010. And it's a oil stick. It's a diptych, so two of those panels. And it's also based on drawings in my sketchbook. And then after this period, I started thinking about photo translations. This is from a series called Bodies of Water. The ones you saw prior to this that were heavy black and white were called On the Fringe of the Field. So they're different series. So this is anyway a series, a small group I did called Bodies of Water. So let's go on to the next one, which is Martinique, 2014. I did it after André Kertész's photograph called Martinique, which he made January 1st, 1972. The oil stick is the same material exactly, only I've added a white stick and a medium gray, which allowed me to get the gray values, so the scale of black to white, more like a black and white classic photograph would have. And he's one of my favorite photographers, André Kertész. And so that's what I started to do slowly, is get involved in a particular photograph and then translate it like I would from French to English, a novel. But this is my language. And it allows me to do a much larger scale, allows people to walk into the image. I always hated the fact that photographs could be this tiny little bits. And then I would see some shiny material in front of it and I'd feel like I couldn't enter in. And so this was my chance to pay attention to the photograph, really see what's there, and then do an homage to the photographer that I like so much. Okay, the next one is another one of these photo translations. It's called Construction. I did that in 2020 after Manuel Alvarez Bravo, La Tolteca, which he did in 1930, maybe printed it in 32. And it's same materials, oil stick, and another photo translation. So then the next, I just have two more to show you. One is Little Mine. And I want to show you that this is the way, before I started the photo translations, I was working with still just one black paint stick, which is what all those other Fringe of the Field pieces were. They were just a black paint stick and white paper. Nothing else is there. And then I fudged a little and put a very soft thing that reads as gray, but I didn't have a gray. I just had black. And then I thought, gee, and it's based on David S. Wilson's Oriental Mine stamp mill in the trees near Allegheny in 2002. So this was my first attempt, in a way, at a photo translation. So then that led me, I was thinking, oh, if I just had white and gray, that I could do more translations. So then the last one I want to show you tonight is The Fog of War, and it's 2014, and I did it, and it's after Robert Mapplethorpe's Coral Sea, which is the name of the boat at the bottom. I hope you can all see the boat. Or I guess the Navy would call it a ship, not a boat. And that was taken in 1983. It's my favorite Mapplethorpe photograph. And it becomes ultimately all about the gray or the fog. So, and there is a hidden horizon line right about 20% up in the, and part of it is when you see the photograph, it's hidden, but it's there. And so that was part of the trying to do homage to the photographer to try to get what he saw, which was this hidden horizon that was still there. So, and I just love the fact that that gray became more and more silvery, and it just, and then of course I called it Fog of War, which was not what he called it, but seems very appropriate these days. Sometimes you do things and you don't see why you do them until later in some time has passed. So I think I've covered everything, but I wasn't tracking the time very well. So is there?
I think it's time to move along, and that was wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. A real honor.
All right.
Thank you, Archana. And you reminded me with all of the things that you said, some of which I had not heard before, that I should have told the audience to take notes, to have a notepad and pencil and pen, because both of these artists have a lot to share. So now that that's been said, I get to introduce Dewitt Chang. And he is originally from Ohio, which I did not know until recently. He's a photographer, critic, and curator. And he pursued several different avenues: engineering, art history, and painting, before falling in love with street photography about 10 or 12 years ago. His camera goes with him everywhere, and his constant companion, and particularly on what he calls his walkabouts, where he captures moments of San Francisco's nature, light, and urban life. And as tempted as I am to say more about him, I think it's only right for me to turn the conversation over to the artists. Thank you.
Hello, well, thank you for that intro. I'm delighted to be here, especially paired with Archana, who's had such an illustrious career as an artist and art administrator. I saw many shows at Mccullough when I was writing for East Bay Express, and they were always interesting and provocative. Most artists in the Bay Area who are not of the 70 generation will probably know me as a writer and critic, which I started to do about 20 some years ago. But before that, I was a not very successful painter and draftsman. So the writing was a kind of plan B, and I'm thinking about moving on to plan C now and going back to the surrealist work that I did originally. I was born in Ohio in a little town called Marietta, which is on the southeastern part. It's historically important because it was the first settlement in the Northwest Territory. And I recently read a book about it called The Pioneers by David Mccullough, which was really eye-opening because I had always been bored to death living there. But it's a story of these generations of New Englanders who founded this little town and fought the Indians and fought hard times and basically opened up that part of the country. So I came out here in California in 1967. Went to Stanford, originally in architecture, but the game was up after I went to Florence, to the Stanford's Florence campus in '69, summer of '69. And I had taken some art history courses there before that, but going to the Prado was really my epiphany. I just knew that I had belonged in the art tribe. So I changed my major to art history. Was always interested in realism, even though time, and then rather suspect quote narrative rather than purely formalist. This is a selection of my kind of surrealist work from basically '71, which is the top left one. It was maybe 6 months after I graduated, through about the mid to late '90s, when I decided that since I was not showing or selling anything, I was going to put it in storage and do this writing thing. But they mostly come out of collages and sketches, and that I play with until I get something that seems to tell a story and have a kind of emotion to them, sort of strangeness, melancholy, and which is increased or complemented by the titles that I give them, which generally come from ancient religion and philosophy. For example, the second one there on the top row is dust is their fare and clay is their food. The fourth one over is epiphany. The fifth one over is eidolon, which is the Greek word for an image or phantom. So I was interested in not only kind of strangeness in these characters, but kind of pathos. So anyway, and so I have behind me, maybe you can't see it, maybe you can see it, this gray binder. It's full of preparatory sketches, and I've not looked at that binder for 20 years. So I'm thinking about going back to it and basically doing them digitally. And so I won't have to stretch canvas and do all that stuff. Let's go on to the next slide, which is my photographs. In about 2012 or so, maybe it was earlier than that. Well, I'd started writing criticism for websites and publications a little after 2000. Started with San Francisco Art Magazine, which was an online source, then wrote for Art Week for a few years before it went under, wrote for Art Limited, and East Bay Express, East Bay Monthly. I now write for visualartsource.com and the democracychain.org, which is a political spin-off of that. So I started carrying a little 4 megapixel Canon around with me. And when you carry a camera, everything looks like a photograph. So between trips to galleries and museums, I would see things and take pictures of them. And I got a better camera and then another better camera. And so now I really do feel quite naked if I'm out there without a camera to catch whatever the world coughs up at me. So I'm very, very much interested in architecture, as Archana is, and I stole a term from Gordon Matta Smith called anarchitecture, which is about, could have been creative destruction, but they're basically they're not, of course, postcard views. They're idiosyncratic, sometimes funny, sometimes a little abject, but generally, well, they're all abstract. And so I'm just walking around looking for things that seem to cohere into some kind of image with some meaning and presence. And I do very little editing. I'll do a little cropping. I sometimes fix perspective, but generally, if I don't see it correctly, if it isn't there, it isn't there. So it's really quite different way of working from the drawings, which are all internal and psychological and kind of, you know, I struggle to bring into the light, let's say, and whereas these are just gifts that are out there. And so when I walk around, I can shoot 25 a day. I've shot as many as 250. I edit those, and if I shoot a lot, I get, maybe a 10 or 20% failure rate, but most of the I shoot, I keep. If what I saw was valid. I live near the beach, so I go down to Ocean Beach several times a week, and there are just occasional fabulous gifts from the elements out there. Though I'm not really a nature photographer per se. I'm not going out to Yosemite, with a $5,000 worth of equipment. It's just a fairly ordinary Canon DSLR and whatever can happen to put between the four borders, the four edges of the image. Go on to the next one. So this one is of course just a bundle of garbage someone had in the driveway, but of course it reminded me of Giorgio de Chirico's metaphysical paintings, and so it's that my knowledge of art history is always intruding or obtruding, but also enriching the meaning for me. And I think that if somebody knows de Chirico, they would see this is related to his Ferrara period, but I don't insist on it. Most of the writing that I do is kind of aimed at the educated person who's taken art history 101. And so then I want to extend that knowledge into whatever the current art that I'm writing about is. For example, I see this as a combination of synthetic cubism and maybe a little bit of Max Ernst, who's one of my idols. And of course, the combination of the rectilinear and the curvilinear, and then the interior and exterior. I mean, I'm really fond of that kind of synthesis of opposites, which is really a thing that the surrealists believed in the kind of the emergence of the dream into reality. And the uncanniness. This don't know if people will recognize it, but this is on Minnesota Street next to the galleries there, and the garage was open, and I had shot it before, but I love the blue stripe there and the sort of hash marks. So it's just it's being alert to what's out there and how the visual elements combine and impinge on each other, combine and create something new. And so discovering digital photography was really eye-opening for me. It's made me much more aware of color. I used to be more of a black and white more sculpturally minded, let's say, more compositionally minded, and so now I've become much more tuned to color, and it's I would never have predicted that my art making would take this direction. So I will continue to do these as well as to do the critters, and I think that the art world is, not that I care at this point in my career so much, that the art world was much more accepting of people who do different kinds of artwork after Gerhard Richter kind of, paved the way for us. Anyway, let's go through the rest of the photos. I think I've done my 10 minutes. 22nd Street in the near Valencia. And it just got stopped in my tracks by this, by the lace work and the color contrast. Nearby, I think it's 22nd or 21st Street. A couple of years ago, there was a show of Walker Evans at SF Moma, and he's always been one of my favorites. So I wanted to write something about him, but he was very interested in non-arty art. And of course, even anti-art, even non-art turns into art eventually. But I would say that I'm interested in that too, in the ordinary and the unseen, and finding a kind of order and beauty in it. Of course, here's another one of those beautiful sunsets out at Ocean Beach.
Yes, please continue your conversation, and then we will have some time for our audience to question them.
Okay, I'd like to ask Archana about her term architecture, is it? And what that means to you, because your work has an architectural look, but there's also, I mean, some of them I'm reminded of typography. So
Yes, well, I think I started the series. It was called Text, which is typography or letters forms. Context, so that everything was understandable only in the context. And then texture, so small letter forms, for example, would create a texture to look at if they were seen in a certain context. But then if they were seen as enormous forms, then they would be architectural. So I came up with architecture because everything was text, context, texture, architecture by the scale alone. And then if you change the color, that also changes the emotional tone. So all of that brings up the context. So, but I've always loved architecture and the way that a building or a structure fits in the natural world or your urban world or whichever. But I just also realized that a line on an architect's drawing could just be very short, but could mean 40,000 square yards of concrete on a different scale, so that it was all, you read the drawing differently if it was about architecture. Does that make sense?
yeah, yes.
And tell us about your anarchitecture.
Well,
a lot.
I may have mentioned I stole that term from Gordon Matta Clark, but so I have to give him credit. But basically, it's the concept of architecture that's anarchic, unruly, dissolving. One of my favorite books is Rose McCullough's Pleasure of Ruins, which is a kind of study of ruins in the ancient world, and it's just got a wonderful lyrical text. But and I'm fond of the Romantic painters who did the Piranesi and Hubert Robert who did the Roman ruins. I guess it's my romantic sentiment for melancholy and the squeak of the owl, so to speak. So I think that's what I like to see in my urban still lifes is a touch of a real life, and they're not in any way meant to be sort of what I call real estate pictures.
Nobody would mistake them for that.
Fragments that come together and come here into some kind of other whole.
So I think an architecture fits your urban photographs perfectly.
Oh, yeah, thank you. Thank you.
The terms go, the ideas fit perfectly. So I wanted to ask you a little bit more about surrealism, because you obviously were intrigued by it.
Mhm.
And I also have elements of that in my work. So I'm curious about what got you interested in surrealism.
Well, my experiences with Bosch and Goya in the Prado, and actually I discovered this Austrian artist named Alfred Cuban when I was in Munich. And I ran across a book of his drawings at Stanford later that year, and I kept it for 6 months. So I was, and Odilon Redon, whose birthday it is today. So I've always been interested in the visionary and the weird, although some of what passes for kind of visionary is kind of schlocky to my taste, in my opinion. So, and I was interested in Tanguy and Mata and all those people and Max Ernst, Magritte when I was in school, and even though it was passé, right? It was not. It was you couldn't like that stuff. So I think now that we no longer believe in the evolutionary, model of art history, we're free to revisit whatever we want to. So it's a freer time. So I think that's a good thing. I've always felt that, like with de Kooning, art history is a rich soup. Why deny yourself?
Wow, that sounds like a great segue into our Q&A section. So we'd love to invite our audience to ask questions if you like. And you can unmute and ask a question. Pamela, do you have any questions?
I have a lot of questions for our guests. And I suppose I could ask them about the relationship between photography and painting. But unless either of you has a comment about that, then we can move on to other ideas.
Well, I think I'd like to hear what Archana has to say about her series, which I've forgotten the name of, photo translations, which are monochrome copies in oil stick and in pastel, I guess, I'm not sure, of classic photographs. I mean,
I know you'd have to think that's a really hokey thing to do, right?
well, it's very postmodernist. It's, Sherry Levine did her photographs after Walker Evans, and so for you, it was just a way of copying these works that you admired so much and sort of absorbing them into yourself. I mean, the way traditional artists copied other artists.
Yeah, I saw them as homages, and also it helped me get over my sort of love-hate relationship with photography, where I felt excluded from walking into the image. One is by scale.
Yeah.
And one is that there was so much in photographs I couldn't really see, especially classic black and white ones, where I couldn't see what was really in the photograph. So the best way to see anything is to draw it or paint it, because you have to pay attention to every centimeter, you just can't take anything for granted. And so it set me off on this sort of research project where I would try to look at 4 or 5 different printings of a photograph, because a photograph is never always exactly the same, as depending on when somebody printed it and who was the printer, and did he decide to cut it down on one side or make it extra dark in the background or something like that. So there were certain photographers that just got my eye, but I didn't understand exactly what was going on. So by drawing and painting, I not only stretched my own painting skills in a way that weren't being stretched by one black paint stick, but it also allowed me to see them for the first time and to enter into them, and also to see that they could be comfortable in my own pigment stick or paint stick, oil stick, however you want to call them, material, the way I was working with the images before that. So they're a learning experience, but they're also a lot of fun, and I'm challenged to have to solve certain things in a different way and make a convincing image, even though if you compare the two right to each other, you can see how much I simplify and how they really are transformed, I believe. But they're close enough to be recognizable by anybody who has the photography history or background. They'll know that that's a, you know, that's a Manuel Alvarez Bravo image, or that's a Mapplethorpe image or whatever. So that, and it just has been a kind of unusual. I never expected that I would keep doing it, but it's been so rewarding that I've continued to do it for a while.
Is there color in the Alvarez Bravo photo, or is that something I'm imagining?
No, actually, there is a kind of gray that looks a warmer gray that I did I did some watercolor over the sort of sandy area. Yeah, and it does read as a different color, but technically I was trying to stay in my black, white, and gray. So it's a gray watercolor.
We have a question.
Yes, Jan.
I'd actually like to start with a comment, and then I do have a question. And my first comment is I find it really interesting that Archana is taking a photograph, which is flat, an actual flat image, and then in drawing is creating something that's three-dimensional in this layering and building up with the materials, and that Dewitt is moving in the opposite direction, going from the experience of something that's actually three-dimensional and creating something two-dimensional out of it, really flat. I think this is a really interesting kind of two ships passing in the night almost at some point of intersection. And I think that's really fascinating to see the work together. But I do have a real question for Dewitt, because you mentioned really briefly that you're shifting to plan C and considering going back to painting. So could you tell us a little bit about what is drawing you back to painting and where that decision is coming from?
Sure. Well, when I stopped doing that work in about 2000 or so, I put it aside and I just thought I'll do writing and curating, and that's sort of, I'm more valuable to the art world in that way, and certainly more accepted that way. But you know, I just turned 70 something, and I've got this work that I've never really gotten out there, and I thought, well, oh, here's an interesting angle. Because of the internet, and some of you know that I'm on Facebook all the time, blabbing away, it becomes possible to disseminate work without going through the sort of gateway system of the commercial art world. And of course, we all know that the art galleries here, it's a tough job. They have to pay the bills. And so they're a little bit constricted by what will sell. And my work's never had, you know, I think, you know, maybe 1% of people get it, or if that. So I don't have to care about that right now. So I can just sort of do my work and put it out there online. And if people like it, fine. And if they don't, fine. And that's really nice. I mean, I'm sure that all artists know that, you know, you put your heart and soul into your work, and if you're lucky, you get a show, and if you're really lucky, somebody reviews it, right, in a meaningful way, or even in a casual way, and the amount of reward that you get is so minuscule compared to the effort that goes into the artist's life. That's what kind of drove my writing career for 20 years. But at the same time, the writing climate, the infrastructure for writing, at least during the pandemic, is really reduced. And so I'd be happy to resume writing at the kind of level that I did before, but and occasionally I do write things for Visual Art Source or other places, but it's just been decimated. Even Art Practical went under, and I just think that this is tragic for the Bay Area art world. I don't know why we cannot support a real infrastructure for art writers, so that some of them will actually want to, some like art history grad students or artists even will want to do it for even a meager pay, which is what it is, and see it as a kind of career, a side hustle, right? If not a career path. It's not a career path. So it's too bad, but I've kind of spent my years in the vineyards, and so happy to help when I can, but it's a systemic problem, in my opinion.
I think that is a great clarion call, and I hope that you all out there heard it, and if you know writers, encourage them. And I think that's great. Thank you so much. We are getting a little ahead of ourselves with time, so I'd like briefly to ask you all to share any opportunities that you know of for artists. And I think maybe the first person to check in with is Shelley. You might know what's going on and share. Of course, you know what's going on at Gallery Route 1.
Thanks, Pamela. Well, one of the things I wanted to say is that, Dewitt was mentioning how commercial galleries really want you to sell your work, right? And one of the things about a nonprofit art gallery like Gallery Route 1 is that we care more about the artist process, what matters to the artist, and great if the work sells, but that's not a requirement at the gallery. And sometimes there's work that we show that isn't for sale. So that's one of the things that's unique about a nonprofit art gallery. And we are still looking for members. And so Gallery Route 1 is has a group of artists who put on our entire exhibition program. They show their own work, and they also show the work of visiting artists. And so I'm going to put a link in the chat. So if you're interested in checking out that opportunity, you can follow that up later. All right. How about you, Pamela? Do you have anything?
I do, but first of all, I'd like to say that was beautifully done, Shelley. Great segue, and I'm glad that you stressed the nonprofit. The only thing I have is one little tidbit. I was doing some research today for a venue for curation, and I don't know how many of you know about Visions Art Museum in San Diego. It is a textile, weaving and textile museum, ostensibly, but when you go to their website, you'll see some extraordinary things, more original than a lot of what I've seen in a long time. And they have an ongoing call for entries. So if you would like to contact them, just go to visionsartmuseum.org. Okay, and now I think we can move to our closing. And first, thank you so much, Dewitt and Archana. It's been a real treat to have you. And I think we should start publishing a script of what our artists say. And that said, I want you to all to note that next month, Arts Exchange will not be a live broadcast. However, we will air one of our more popular programs, backed by popular demand, featuring Gallery Route 1's own Tony Littlejohn in conversation with Orrin Carpenter. And we will be showing that on Wednesday, the 18th of May. And again, Wednesday, the 18th of May at 6 o'clock. And Shelley will actually be live, even though the broadcasting will not. And she can tell you what's going on here and get your suggestions as well.
Yeah, and I wanted to, talking about another nonprofit for just a moment, there's a art auction up through May 22nd right now in the Mccullough Gallery. And it is going to be very, it's very much fun to see it. There's a lot of Bay Area artists in it, obviously, and it's free to visit. So just check that out.
Would you mind typing the website address in the chat for us?
Yeah, I can do that.
Thank you.
And Archana, is that live as well as online?
Yeah, it's in, the work is up in the gallery live to see.
Oh, so we can go in and see it.
Yeah, but there's different ways to bid on it. So you want to probably get in touch with the Institute to do that. But just to go see it and get interested and see a lot of interesting work, I do recommend it. So let me.
Thank you.
All right.
It's here. So.
Any other things to share from anyone before we close our evening?
Can I
I'd
say
like to,
something? Go
me
ahead, me.
go ahead.
Hi, can I say something?
Yes.
You know, watching both of you and looking at the work and being, being an artist and a teacher for like 40 years, teaching foundation studies, it was so really wonderful to see both of your work really talking about basic principles of design and, underneath all the, the other stuff. And I just enjoyed that so much. Specifically, I want to say, Archana, your black and white pieces, I've done so many classes with, black and white, move black and white stuff on a white page, and talk about composition. And I never got tired of it. I can do it forever. But seeing your black and whites, and the composition thing, it was just so inspiring and saying, yes, it'll never tire you. It's forever this amazing thing that you do with positive negative space that will be there forever and enjoy forever. And so thank you for that.
Thank you. Yeah, means a lot to me.
Yeah.
Elizabeth, did you have something to say?
Well, I want to say thank you. I wish I had been able to come in a little bit earlier. I was out of town and just got home. But the exhibit, of course, at Mccullough is really amazing. And that's one way we support our community, and Archana has supported the art community in the Bay Area for so many years. And thank you so much, Archana, and being a good friend and all of those things, even during times when I wasn't creating art. But would you like to hear, is anyone interested in an exhibition opportunity? And would you like me to type that into the chat?
Yes.
Please do.
Okay, I'll do that. Thank you so much. Great talk.
And
Yes, it looks like we have Toru who wants to say something.
I'm sorry, I was trying to appraise what Archana's, we are all appreciating Archana. That was I was trying.
I see.
I'm so sorry. We are just.
That's okay. Thank you. Thank you.
thank you.
All right. Well, I guess if there's no more sharing, we'll go ahead and wrap up. Okay. If you are interested in presenting as an artist for the Artist Exchange, you can send an email to Pamela Blotner at gmail.com. If you were moved by today's presentation and want to support the work that Gallery Route 1 does to inspire people to experience the world in new ways through art, make a donation. We would love that. You can select community outreach donations and then look for the drop-down menu and Artist Exchange. And thank you so much, Pamela. You always do an amazing job of finding artists to bring together for these conversations. Thank you, Dewitt Chang and Archana Horsting for being here with us, and for all of you who showed up to experience this evening. And we look forward to seeing you on May 18th.
And thank you for being our Wizardess of Oz, Shelley.
You're welcome. Thank you, Pamela.